I'm terrified to spend money. I'm 28 and I have no debt, but I have this constant fear that I am behind in everything financially. Retirement, savings, salary, home down payment, etc. And as a result, I never spend money on anything that isn't a need. This has caused me to not really do much but work and go home, and I feel like I should try to live a little, but then I always talk myself out of it because the money would be more efficient somewhere else. I currently put 30% of income into retirement, then the rest is mostly savings unless I need something. My parents went bankrupt twice before I turned 10, and we lived in poverty, so I never developed a need for material things. I always think of every purchase as, man, imagine if this $20 was put into retirement instead of this movie ticket. I currently make $75K a year, have $28K in retirement, and have $10K in savings. How do I find a way to experience life for once? I don't really have any friends as a result of this because I never put myself out there. Thanks in advance. Well, guys, I have scheduled an appointment with a therapist. I will give it an honest try and go into it believing I can become a better person. Thank you all for the advice. Hopefully this gets me on a better path. One of my relatives lived this way, always complaining about her car, house, windows, plumbing, etc., etc. Generally seemed unhappy about almost everything. She worked until forced to retire, didn't spend much, always very frugal. When she passed, she left over $750 across various accounts. She could have fixed all the little things she was always complaining about and easily improved her way of life without making even a noticeable dent. You can't take it with you. What good does it do if it just sits at the bank the entirety of your life? My 102-year-old grandmother was still saving for retirement when she died. Living through the Depression left a mark. Live 10% below your means and enjoy your life. This is the key. Once you make a budget and move funds to savings, rest is yours to spend without a care. I do this and this helps. I move some percent of my income to savings and pay my rent. What left is for me to part. No offense, but what a waste. You only have so many years. Gotta relax and enjoy retirement at some point. Agreed. Could never explain PTSD or the value of therapy to her. My parents lived a simple middle-class lifestyle, and to her they were rich. She never got over seeing people starving in the street. Yeah, I get. There's no explaining that to someone that literally lived through the Great Depression. I can't imagine. I hope you're doing well and take it easy later in life. I am later in life and currently sitting on the Celebrity Reflection, drinking margaritas, heading to the Dominican Republic. Life is good. My Martha was like that. Made me put green beans in my pocket at the diner on a trip to Chattanooga. Easy to say if you didn't live through the Great Depression, no offense. Do some research on how dirt poor people were back then, and maybe have some empathy on the trauma that causes. Also, mental health was literally the last thing that generation cared about. I grew up dirt poor, was homeless in HS. What people like you don't understand is that what you think is enjoyable is not what we think is enjoyable. You imagine we live hunkered down, constantly in fear, when in reality we're perfectly happy to read a good book instead of splurging on entertainment. We're perfectly happy driving an old car over driving something new. You don't need to spend money to be entertained. This is a weird response to someone saying it's a waste that a 102-year-old was working and still saving for retirement until their death. They didn't say anything about splurging on entertainment. They said live below means but find enjoyment in life. Not sure why you need to frame things with what people like you don't understand. The point, since it went over your head, is that you can find enjoyment in life without spending money. Well, some of us can. Being frugal is a different scale of values to those who need everything and always brand new. She probably lived through the Great Depression. That gave a lot of people who lived through the era a form of financial PTSD. I knew people in my mom's era and older that saved everything. Tinfoil, paper, you name it. Experiencing extreme financial unrest is a major stressor for people who live through it. OP could have a little of that. I'm glad they've decided to get some counseling. The gas shortages and truck strikes of the 70s hit right as my mom entered the workforce and moved out on her own, and she remembers seeing entire aisles at the grocery store that were completely empty, particularly of household goods such as toilet paper and paper towels. To this day, she always keeps at least 2 closets completely packed full of paper towels and toilet paper. Which also meant that we were set when the pandemic hit and people were panic buying toilet paper. And it's generational. I'm unpacking lessons my grandma taught my mom. There's no need for me to live like they did, and it requires a lot of serious effort to change directions. She was always complaining. Also, some people just love to complain all the time. It's so exhausting to deal with. Probably contributed to why she kicked the bucket. Everybody dies, so maybe not. Every coworker ever. Also sucks to be that person. I don't like to complain, but my stupid brain is pretty much complaining non-stop and it slips out. Just to add on to this OP, once you reach about 50 calories of accessible funds, there's almost no emergency you can't at least survive. I have a reason for this, but you guys would call me insane, and it's a long story. I understand that. No, I read it a little, and I understand, just trying to give you a different POV. They grew up through the Great Depression, so that is what had them in that mindset. Saved everything as well. I cleaned out the place after and must have filled the recycling bin 5 times with, I kid you not, I think literally every piece of mail they received from 1960 to 2010. Yep, I saw that with several people in that era. Saving all the tin foil for the next time. Paper. Keeping things that should be tossed. My aunt lost her husband not long after the Depression and was left with 8 children. She worked in a sewing factory and still made every single loaf of bread and roll from scratch. All her kids knew how to do it. Nobody in that family ever buys store-bought anything, much. It took 3 generations for somebody to buy a loaf of bread. I had Depression-era grandparents that were the same way. It's not hoarding in the pathological sense, but they kept and organized absolutely everything that could be of use because resources were scarce, and it would be shameful to waste something they worked hard to obtain and might not have a chance to again. 1000% accurate. Mine didn't save every shred of tinfoil, but every extra button, few inches of ribbon, zipper, old set of shoes, you name it. Shoes and clothes started out as nice clothes, then casual, then home clothes, then gardening, project clothes, and finally going into the rag bin where they would be used until they literally couldn't be used anymore. Absolutely agree that they were are wasted, and my grandfather built furniture in his spare time. He wasn't a master furniture maker, but you would be impressed by his skill level and capabilities. BC, his family couldn't afford it, so he learned how to. Had all the tools for it, and kept everything in top working order, no matter what. I took after their example for some of these things. I had Depression-era grandparents that were the same way. It's not hoarding in the pathological sense, but they kept and organized absolutely everything that could be of use, because resources were scarce, and it would be shameful to waste something they worked hard to obtain and might not have a chance to again. You don't seem to be saying that you ignore things that need to be repaired, etc., in order to save, as the person to whom you reply described. I'd suggest making a budget where you have entertainment and recreation spending money. Then, since you are extremely value-minded, consider entertainments and recreation that deliver value. Activities that return a lot of value for money time invested. Fitness outdoors, hiking, climbing, kayaking, etc. are great for your health and mental health, with great payoffs for the time and money invested. You also meet healthy people, woodworking/making, learning to make and build things from wood, 3D printing, art, sculpture, etc. are valuable skills and also useful in life. These are also mentally and emotionally centered hobbies. Cooking chef skills. There are cooking classes and activities you can take, like fine cuisine skills in most cities. The classes are social networking events as well as lifestyle events. Learning to be a great cook is a good path for a healthy lifestyle and also much cheaper than relying on prepared restaurant convenience foods. Dance classes, fitness classes, etc. are all social networking and physical mental activities that are recreational but also developmental. In other words, you can allocate money for yourself to entertainment and lifestyle that also have a big payoff in terms of value returns for your money if you select your activities carefully. You can select your activities and recreation in the same way you select CKS to invest in. What will you get the most out of? And does it lead to other financial advantages and savings in life? Maybe that way you won't feel that you're wasting money on entertainment and recreation. And you can expand your idea of what an investment is beyond it being just cash in the bank, like learning how to cook your own fine dining restaurant quality food, which could potentially result in saving money for decades. I'm not suggesting this is a way to ground your whole attitude to art, entertainment, and recreation, but it's a way to get started maybe. Cooking's chef skills. There are cooking classes and activities you can take, like fine cuisine skills, in most cities. The classes are social networking events as well as lifestyle events. Learning to be a great cook is a good path for a healthy lifestyle and also much cheaper than relying on prepared restaurant convenience foods. Cooking is insane value for money. With a bit of practice, you can be making things that are often better than most sit-down restaurants you will eat at. The same budget that you are probably already spending for groceries. You have to eat. Might as well make it good. Last night I made tostadas for So and I. Total cost to feed us both dinner, $7.41. Total time investment in the cooking, maybe 30 minutes. We'll eat 2 more batches in the coming days, which will go faster since I won't be making refried black beans from scratch. I've become a big fan of Brian Lagerstrom's YouTube channel. Some of the stuff he does is super complex, but he also has a lot of videos on relatively simple and/or cheap weeknight meals. I get a lot of ideas from him. That said, I also used to work in a restaurant kitchen, so there are a lot of skills that I take for granted. IMO, the biggest thing for someone learning to cook is to start small. Don't come flying out of the gate with some super complex recipe. Look for stuff with relatively few ingredients. Learn to walk before you try and run. Edit. Example video from Brian, stesla.com/watch =4pguz. I like how this video addresses an entire set of meals and how single dishes can get reused and combined into different outputs. My version of it is a little simpler. Mostly I do various things based on the rice plus kale combination. And I'm not as frugal, but I don't need to be. Another site I look at a lot is budgetbites.com. I make these coconut curry chickpeas, budgetbites.com/coconut curry chickpeas every few weeks. A batch of this plus some rice makes for a lot of delicious and filling food. Ditto this, it is also a massive boost to your self-esteem, at least in my case. I used to be an extremely shy cook before I moved to the USA. I would stick with very simple, though not unhealthy, recipes and maybe order takeout a bit more than I should, mostly because I was too anxious about things going wrong to want to cook more ambitious things. After I relocated, I found that I had a lot of time on my hands. My new job hadn't started return to office yet, and I was in need of 2 cooked meals a day until I had access to the office canteen. I had a couple of cookbooks I'd received as gifts, so I dived in, knowing that I had as much time as I needed to make mistakes and get things right. I'm now confidently trying new meals for myself, experimenting with existing recipes, cooking for friends, etc. I'm hoping this doesn't come across as bragging. Rather, I want to try and encourage OP to invest in this skill if they haven't already. It's both financially sound and personally hugely rewarding. I think also important to realize that for some people, ingredient costs will rarely be cheaper than buying, especially for some common snack foods. When I was living alone, it was basically never cost-effective for me to cook anything more than eggs and sandwiches and pasta. Anything that required a small amount of a larger ingredient would often lead to things going to waste or buying more ingredients to make recipes that used those little bits. And in the end, it was definitely more than if. I just spent the $11 on the dish and got 2 to 3 meals of leftovers. You will likely never be able to make a pho that's as good and as cheap as the little shop down the street. Same with that chicken kadai or gyro bowl. It took a long time for me to learn that I wasn't saving money. I was spending more, and it was an expensive, but very fun, hobby to cook from scratch. With my partner, we often have to calculate if it's cheaper to buy the potatoes, buy the brisket, buy ingredients for the roast everything and get all the toppings, or just get the Tuesday chopped brisket potato special that's 2 potatoes, brisket, fixings, and rolls for $9. The scratch is always cheaper and better mantra simply isn't always or often true. It depends on what you're cooking with. I'm Filipino, and I can easily live on a rotation of some of the dishes I grew up with. Most of the ingredients for any Filipino dish includes garlic, fish sauce, ginger, soy sauce, chicken or pork, and white rice. One dish in particular, adobo, I can have for lunch and dinner for 2 or 3 days if I'm eating it by myself. My boyfriend can't do that. He's a little picky and needs to have a processed meat sandwich every once in a while because that's what he grew up with. He's Irish and grew up in Philadelphia. I usually add more veggies to anything I make, so it's a healthier version and it adds a little more to the dish. I live in Hawaii, and eating out every day is not cheap. Every plate lunch around where I work is $12 at minimum. Can't help you get to the solution if you retain the deets, my friend. Beside that, maybe start with once a month, do something for yourself. Within a reasonable budget. Doesn't have to be pricey, but don't cheap out, it's for you. You have to celebrate your wins in life, meaning you work hard, take care of priorities, and as long as your core items are taken care of, retirement, bills are paid, not saying waste the cash, but you are just as important to the equation. Skimping on that piece ends up you staring at a mirror one day, saying the tried and true should've, would've, could've. Well, first, what are you into? Everyone is into something. Cars, hiking, biking, gaming, tinkering, collecting cigars, hell something. But that is the easy way, versus forcing into a hobby you may be hesitant to try, go with the norm, then gradually get outside of the box. You can't take it with you, but you can give your kids a huge head start with that kind of money. I agree that there's a balance to saving/spending, but there's a case to be made for some people to live a less enjoyable life, knowing that they can make their children's lives much easier. I have no plan or interest to ever have kids, though. Most of my friends are dink as well, so I most likely would have hundreds of thousands in the bank the moment I die, which would suck. Also a dink, so we're going to try and spend every cent before we die. With no one to leave anything to, why not get a reverse mortgage in our 60s and spend the money we have saved up? Even if we accidentally go into a little debt, there's no one to screw over when we die. We're projected to have 1.5 million in retirement account by 65, so we should be totally fine. But yeah, if you're a dink live, who are you going to leave that extra money to? Yep, we have a couple of nieces and nephews who will get whatever's left. But the plan is to enjoy ourselves, and if something ends up being left, so be it. Same. We only have a couple nieces and nephews, so when the time gets closer that we're retirement age, we'll probably restructure wills to add them and just split any liquid money evenly among them. They'd be in their 50s, though. Well, hopefully assuming we die in our late 80s. Haha. Counter-argument is that if she wasn't such an obsessive saver and spent money on every problem, she wouldn't have had even close to $750K for retirement. Yeah, but spending $70K of that on a reliable vehicle and repairing all of the issues with their home would greatly improve their quality of life, and you still have $680K left. I'm aware, but I meant $70K total between a vehicle and all of the house repairs. I mean, a roof could be $20K, $10K for new windows for the whole house, major plumbing work. IDK, I was just speculating. Yup, it's all about balance. Make sure you're saving for retirement and have some emergency money, and after that, have some fun. The point of money is to give you more peace of mind, fun, and freedom. If you're obsessing to the point where you're saving plenty, but doing the opposite of that, you fucked up, and then dying as one of the wealthiest people in the graveyard. Just guessing, but for her, she probably wanted to leave something behind to loved ones, so she sacrificed to do so. I have a friend from HS who makes over $300K per year, but I bet they spend all of it. Huge house, expensive cars, expensive clothes, and a really expensive boat. He's a hey, look at me type of guy. They are in so much debt and own nothing, but live like kings and queens. We are all in our 50s. I've known both of them since we were 12. I shake my head at that, just not in front of them. I think the best way is to find a balance. You need some fun, but it doesn't have to always be expensive. I always think about this. I stopped thinking about retirement, savings, etc. I'm a big believer in living in the moment. I've experienced so much negativity slash financial control in my life that now I just do what makes me happy. I've been able to slowly find the glimmers in my life. Whatever I make, I pay off my car, insurance, and also try to do something I enjoy at least once a month. I always think about this. I stopped thinking about retirement, savings, etc. I'm a big believer in living in the moment. I've experienced so much negativity, financial control in my life that now I just do what makes me happy. I've been able to slowly find the glimmers in my life. Whatever I make, I pay off my car, insurance, and also try to do something I enjoy at least once a month. The last jacket you'll wear has no pockets, they say in my country. Can't take anything with you when you die. Wow, thanks for the advice. You're saying you're averse to seeing a therapist. You admit to being so crippled by the fear of spending money because of your childhood that you don't even have friends. Therapy is your answer. If your job provides you with health insurance, which it probably does as you're making $75K a year, your copays won't be expensive, and you have no debt and $10K in savings, which means $35 once a week isn't going to break you. $35 is surprising to me. When I've looked in the past, providers said minimum $200. Maybe I need to look into my insurance more. I do have some leftover HSA from a prior job. Maybe I could use that if it's accepted. For context, it would be $300-ish for me out of pocket, but my payment is $50 with insurance. It also doesn't have to be a permanent thing. Part of therapy is teaching you the tools to manage trauma and stressors on your own. Mark Manson had a podcast episode recently about what we get wrong about therapy. And one of the points he made was that people often expect therapy to be about learning more about yourself, but that therapy is often about unlearning narratives about yourself or your life. One of those narratives is believing that money is only a source of stress in your life. It seems like OP does not have any of the impulse control problems that either or both of their parents had, so therapy would be G. Ood about unlearning that narrative that their life is going to proceed with as much financial trauma as their parents. That will lead to both less distress and more efficient allocation of resources to their personal priorities. A great book specifically on that subject was The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. There are general facts about investing in there, but much of the book is about developing a sense of gentleness and compassion about your own relationship with money, and realizing that your priorities aren't necessarily other people's priorities. There's a podcast by Morgan Housel on the topics within that same book worthwhile to listen to. Definitely make sure the provider is in your network. You can ask your primary doctor for a referral. But therapy is going to help you. It's not about spending money frivolously. It's about how to let go a little bit and allow yourself to enjoy things without guilt. You're doing a great job with your savings and having no debt, but what's the point of that if you're not able to have fun sometimes? You can definitely use HSA money for therapy, and it'll depend on your health insurance, but I specifically chose a plan that covers outpatient therapy appointments, $35 per visit. You just have to make sure the provider is in network. It is so worth it. I have made so much progress with my mental health. One thing has helped me is to spend money on other people. I feel guilty spending money on myself, and I don't like having the latest things anyway. But spending money on other people makes me feel good because they feel good. A recent example, I ran a game at a local bar and rented out a space to host the game and inviting friends. It was a few $100, but honestly makes no difference to my finances. Everyone had a blast, and it was a memory we'll keep for years. Even out of network, I only pay 25%, $50 month of the cost for my therapy appointments, and that's just because I wanted to stay with my current therapist. My insurance offers free telehealth therapy that I could use in a pinch. So many plans cover mental health now. My FSA covers the $50 as well. You should look at this as an investment in your health and your future. Do you want to have the highest quality of life possible? Do you want to be better equipped to make good decisions with your money? Do you want to be better equipped to handle emergencies or disasters? Then this will absolutely save you money in the long run. It will be the best money you ever spend on yourself. No point saving for retirement if you never make it there. You pay yourself retirement and savings. Why not healthcare? You say you only spend money if it is a need, and from your post, this sounds very much like a need. PTSD from childhood financial trauma is a real thing and one that can be helped and improve your quality of life. Dude, if something happens, you already have a decent set of savings. You need therapy, not so you can blow your money, but so that you can enjoy it. And you can find that balance. It takes some learning and mistakes, but you can. But right now, you need someone to walk you through your fear. It's not a waste of money. It's an investment into your personal well-being. It's an investment to gain knowledge on how to be happy. What good is having a fridge full of food if you never eat it? What good is eating that food if it's never enjoyable? Same with money. What good is having it if you never enjoy it? What providers charge as their regular rate and what they charge someone with insurance can drastically differ because they negotiate rates with insurers. And you can always go once or twice a month. Money isn't the only way to be secure in retirement. If you don't tend to your health, and mental health problems can cause serious physical ones, you may not make it to retirement or will need to use a lot more of your fixed income on health needs. Psychologytoday.com/psychology.com. That website helped me browse providers in my area, their rates and insurance they accept. I paid $100 a visit without insurance. People will work with you, and getting over the trauma in our childhood is worth the investment, believe me. My trauma is different from yours, but the weight you are carrying with you can be alleviated. I wish you peace and progress in your personal goals. Thank you for your post. Call your insurance and ask them to send you a list of mental health providers that are in network with your plan. Also, ask your insurance if you have a deductible or copay for these services. That way, you have a better understanding of the costs to you. I have issues with money too for similar reasons, but investing in therapy is a real worthwhile investment if you can afford it. In-network copays are usually max $50. If it's costing $200 for a session, that's out of pocket. If you'd break your leg, you'd pay for a hospital bill. So if you need to treat mental health, that's not something you should consider ignoring. Just like a broken leg, you want professional treatment without long-term damage. I definitely suggest budgeting out your month A and giving yourself allowances that you are comfortable with. List everything you're paying per month, from streaming services to car payments, so you don't have to worry you forgot something. If you have an allowance that you are comfortable with, there's nothing to worry about. If you go over, you can talk about it with your therapist, who can help guide you before it gets out of control. Chances are, if you pay for everything immediately and don't rely on credit cards, you'll be fine. Of course, you need an emergency fund as well, but it seems like you have one. Make your health insurance work for you. Don't work for your health insurance. Your health, mental and physical, is worth investing in, and think of it as that. Just as you are spending money by investing in your retirement, spend your money to invest in your health and well-being. See if your job has an employee assistance program that gives you free therapy sessions. Everywhere I have worked has offered that. Generally, it's 5 sessions, and you might life the therapist and be able to continue seeing them after you use your sessions. Serious question. Why are you even bothering to earn money if you don't want to use it on anything? Then commit to going for 2 months as a necessary evaluational expense. If you never do it, or go once and talk yourself out of going again when it doesn't magically fix you in 2 hours, you will spend the rest of your life wondering if it would have improved your day-to-day life. If you commit to multiple sessions where you can build a rapport with your therapist and practice their advice, you'll know for certain if it's helpful or not. If it costs you $1,600 for 8 sessions to walk away with, the feeling that this approach is definitely not helpful for you, you could make worse financial decisions in a single night. And if it does improve your enjoyment of life, then you'll know it's worth the expense. My insurance Kaiser make my $150 to $200 sessions cost me $15. Look into your healthcare and see if they can recommend you somewhere to go. My provider was $200 a session. Insurance covered roughly 60%, and my flex spending healthcare account covered the rest. Worth every penny. You've got lots of pennies. $200 is chump change, and it's not going to be that much. If you have an HSA at your current job, do make sure you move that old money over. Eventually, the old account will start charging maintenance fees and bleed it dry. Your job might have an employee assistance program, which provides free confidential therapy visits. This is going to depend on the type of insurance plan you have. I have a high deductible plan, and only a few things are the exception to the deductible. Before I reach my deductible, therapy is $250 for me, but after I reach my deductible, it is $0. If your company has an employee assistance program, EAP, or similar, look into it. If you do, it's likely you can get some sessions covered for $0. Instead of spending $200 talking to someone, why not use that money to do a quick weekend trip, eat out, and go to a movie? It depends on where you live. Find a state national park and book a motel near it and take some hikes. It doesn't cost that much. $35 a week. Every therapist near me doesn't take insurance. I honestly don't understand how people afford it. I don't want to say you're wrong because I don't know where you live, but I've lived in a few states and different types of areas, rural, urban, suburban, and I've never not had the option of therapists taking insurance. Most hospital systems have behavioral health departments, which definitely take insurance. If you're looking at private practices, it can be the case that they don't take insurance or only take a few specific ones, but I doubt that none of them do. But I also understand that a lot of therapists aren't accepting new patients or have crazy long wait lists, which can force people into going for expensive options. Eat it. Also, sometimes the difference between it being covered versus not covered is whether you get a referral to go see them. If you're just calling to make an appointment without a referral, insurance probably won't cover it. You are averse to spending money because of childhood trauma. What work have you done with a therapist? I never really viewed it as a trauma, so I figured a therapist wasn't needed. Oh boy, I felt the same way. Come to find out, my neurotic tendencies can all be linked to childhood trauma. My therapist made footnotes about my childhood experiences, and one day said, "Read this and tell whether you think this person suffered trauma as a child." I'm not quite as frugal as you, but my finances are in good order, and I constantly convince myself I'm one sick day from ruin. I love both of my parents, so I feel weird saying that I had a traumatic childhood. I feel it's disrespectful to them. Please don't view this as your parents giving you a traumatic childhood. Poverty, by its very nature, is traumatic, as life can sometimes be in general. Often we go through trying circumstances and don't realize until much later that it has affected and shaped us in some way, either mentally and/or emotionally. View therapy as a learning experience and endeavor to analyze and recognize triggers and symptoms in order to proceed into the future forearmed and informed. So correct. People make a lot of assumptions about what is and isn't trauma. It doesn't just mean abuse and assault. Other things are traumatic, and even series of seemingly small things add up to trauma as well. FWIW, I'm working through this too. I have a hard time with my therapist telling me my parents did XYZ to me, when from my POV they loved me and prioritized me, and I love them still to this day. Specifically when she uses words like neglect or not being considered, etc. I feel like I was considered and certainly not neglected in the way I define the term. I think some of the language is harsh, and I'm not sure if that's on purpose or if it's just reality. But maybe it helps to think of any trauma you experienced as not necessarily malicious or purposefully hurting you. Your parents were trying their best. People can hurt others without meaning to. If it helps, reframe it as emotional trauma during childhood instead of traumatic childhood. I really agree that therapy can be helpful. I didn't think I needed it, but I started going a few years ago, and it's really helped. I'm about your age, and you'd be surprised how much it helps. For you, I think it's pretty clear that experiencing financial insecurity during childhood has made you overcorrect how. 30% in retirement is pretty extreme. I'd say cut that in half probably, and save up 3 to 6 months in an emergency fund. Then you'll know you have financial security. You'll have a big emergency fund, and you have a good job. But I suspect even if you know you are financially secure, you probably still won't feel like it. So that's where a therapist comes in, to see how you can work through your experiences and figure out how to make it all work for you. In this case, it's not even OP's parents hurting them, it's the family financial situation. Is that their parents' fault? Maybe, if mom and data took expensive vacations to Aruba and bought luxury goods on 30% credit cards that they could never repay on their income and crashed the family finances. And maybe not. If mom and dad budgeted responsibly, but an illness or a lost job or a market event wiped out their savings, or they made a legitimate mistake due to not being well informed financially. See, our financial education system is basically the school of hard knocks. The trauma is there either way, though, and OP recognizes it based on their other comments, so they and their therapist can skip the blamestorming phase and move right on to, let's talk about some ways to cope with and maybe move past the traumatic experiences to make your life better. Phase. It's not about your parents, it's about your own psychology and what tools you can use to make it as healthy and effective as you can. Imagine you had a car that you used for your job delivering newspapers. If the car had a flat tire that got in the way of you doing your job and maximizing your income, you would invest in fixing the tire, because that investment will be recouped by the increased effectiveness at your job. Well, your brain is the number one tool you use for every single job you'll ever have. Investing in therapy to make it more effective is the single most useful thing you can do with your money. Well, happiness too. But since OP is clearly focused on their financial stability, framing it in terms of that can also help. What happened in your childhood might not have been your parents' fault. Or maybe they made some mistakes. They're human. A good therapist isn't going to blame your parents or be disrespectful towards them. What you went through was still trauma. Maybe they didn't traumatize you on purpose. That probably wasn't their goal. But the end result is the same. You have issues that you need to work through. Therapy is an investment in you and your health. It's not going to make you hate your par. Hence, if anything, it can help you understand and empathize with them even more. Maybe you don't need to think about it as trauma then. You have patterns of thought and behaviors that you want to improve, so therapy is the answer. You're just trying to improve as a person because you're living in a way that you don't want to live. I'm fairly healthy and well-adjusted and haven't had any major trauma, abuse, etc. But I still see a therapist just to improve my situation in life, improve my average mood, improve how I communicate with people, etc. It's just like going to the gym, but for your brain. Do you think they would describe what they went through as grown adults going bankrupt and being broke as traumatic? If they were honest, probably. Now give that level of empathy to yourself as a child. Unpacking this shit isn't easy, but not addressing it could contribute to your lack of friends and social life. What if it's disrespectful to yourself to not acknowledge that you went through hardship that is having lasting effects? Blame and shame are mostly immature knee-jerk reactions to difficult feelings. Your understanding of issues doesn't have to be about who to blame. It happened. What now? This is a normal thing to think, so don't feel bad about that. But it is fundamentally wrong to think about it that way. You loved your parents, and it's pretty safe to assume that they loved you too. That doesn't mean there was no trauma, though. Your parents' trauma also affects you when you are young and rely on them. It's not their fault, and you aren't actually blaming them, even if it might feel like you are. My parents went through bankruptcy when I was young, and my dad had to stop working when I was 12 because of medical issues. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so that was really hard on my family. They both did the best they could, but it was not easy. This had a huge impact on me personally that I never recognized until I went to therapy for seemingly unrelated reasons. My therapist never said anything bad about my parents, but they did show me how those events changed my perception of the world and how I am supposed to live my life. In your case, 2 bankruptcies must have been very traumatic for your parents. That's really hard to deal with for them because they most likely felt like they were failing you at the time. In some ways they did, but they tried, and it's very clear that you recognize that and forgive them for whatever failures happened. That doesn't mean it doesn't affect you now, it definitely does. Going to therapy isn't blaming your parents for fucking you up. It's taking care of yourself to learn more about why you are the way you are and how can improve your own life now. I feel this. My mother was a single mom working 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. to make ends meet for me and my sister. My mom did the best she could, and she was and is an amazing person. But my childhood was still traumatic from a development standpoint, even though I love my mom dearly and hold no grudges. But I didn't have a mom growing up. I didn't have an adult figure. It was just me and my sister. Led to problems with authority, trust, and expectations. See a therapist for your traumatic childhood. You deserve I think the term trauma is thrown around a lot these days. But it is true that you learn patterns from your parents, which then crop up in adulthood. Some patterns are useful, some cause problems. Money is just one of those things we learn from our parents initially. If a volcano had exploded when you were a kid and your parents had done as much as they could to protect you from it, you'd still be traumatized. Think about it that way. You grow up feeling there isn't going to be enough and live under this idea that may no longer be beneficial. Like the grown elephant tied to a small post. Yeah, the key part of the childhood trauma is the childhood part. It is phrased that way because trauma that occurs during childhood has far greater impact than trauma experienced in adulthood. Doesn't matter if it was caused by someone or it was just life and circumstance. What Youth Watcher said makes sense, but also, parents can inadvertently pass on their trauma to their kids. Not even maliciously, just by way of raising you with harmful tendencies. I'll give my own example. I discovered with my therapist that I have a learned sense of urgency. Because growing up, the adults in my life always felt the need to rush and have things urgently tended to. This became a priority for me. My therapist and I did a values exercise where we narrowed down everything in my life to the 7 most valued things. And guess what? Urgency was not one of them. That realization alone made me drop about 85% of my prioritization on hurrying. The rest took time, and I'm still not 100% there. But man, did I make some strides due to that one subject discovered from a single therapy session. You now know what your next steps are. Therapy isn't exactly cheap. Good thing you have a job making $75K a year, and $10K in savings and, presumably, health insurance. I've struggled with being irrationally cheap about important things in the past, and I was lucky to have an employer that offered such a better deal on HDHP plus HSA health insurance. I max out my HSA account every year for tax purposes and simply pretend that's money that I already spent on healthcare, i.e., no reason to worry about spending it. It's like a gift card. It can sometimes be hard to find a decent in-network therapist, which is a great excuse not to have one. But in my case, I just pay out of pocket from my HSA account and don't worry about it. Bonus is that in years when I'm healthy, it's not even really wasteful. That was going to go to a deductible anyway. Your job has health insurance, I assume, so you already get that discounted. My copay is $35. The money you invest in yourself will pay out dividends in yourself. So if you think of the long-term benefits of it, it's well worth it. Don't use that as an excuse to make a better future for yourself, which you are already afraid of financially. Just take the steps to do it mentally. I grew up poor as well. Many of my friends did. This is the same kind of trauma that impacted most through the Great Depression and the World Wars. Scarcity and hardship are severe stressors because you're talking about survival-level threats. Just based from what you've just shared, it is clear you have trauma. It's not your fault, but it's very real and it's clearly impacting you negatively with stress and anxiety at minimum. Therapy is a lot cheaper than carrying that burden for your life, constantly fearful for a future that might never come. There should be a balance between everything. Right now, your trauma response is to do everything you can to protect against what feels like an inevitable fall into poverty again at the expense of today. That's a life lived in fear, every day. Think of the therapy as a chance to obtain mental compound interest on the investment. The sooner you do it, the more positive impact opportunities you will experience from it. I'm not opposed to therapy entirely. It's just from what I gathered, it's very expensive, but others are saying it's $35, which I could do. Just need to figure out how to go about that. Any sources for finding one? I've always assumed my issues had to be resolved within myself. Maybe find out how much it actually costs before writing it off as too expensive. Go to your insurance website portal and search. I had looked in the past and it was much higher than $35. It was minimum $200 in my area. But maybe I missed something for sure. It's an investment in your well-being and future. It's cheap. If they can argue themselves into spending $200 for therapy, they can reallocate that budget to any number of other things, lol. $200 WK on therapy is literally rent money in some cities. The fact that you are weighing this means you need therapy. This thinking leads to making decisions to cut a pill in half, taking half the medication you need to save a buck, skipping key medical tests to save money. Health is everything. Many charge on a sliding scale. You could also just be honest and say that you're seeking therapy around intense frugality and the cost is a barrier for you. Even if the person you're asking doesn't budge, they can probably give you some other names. Finding a good therapist isn't as easy as finding a medical doctor. It requires some legwork. But just be honest, sliding scale fees are very common. Psychology Today is a website for therapists, and you can sort by insurance and email them directly to find out what the costs are. Even if it is $200, what is the price tag you would put on feeling in control of your life? Of being able to feel comfortable spending money while knowing you are keeping balanced, saving enough to have a good future while not saving too much to prevent you from enjoying the present. I want to be very clear here. I'm not a therapist. I've just seen and experienced a lot of trauma situations, and unfortunately have had to learn a lot way younger than I would have preferred to. If you have insurance through your job, it could be less than $35. I pay $20 per session currently, which is my insurance copay. growtherapy.clash is a good starting point to find someone who can take your insurance. You can meet virtually and get a starting point. Therapists, however, are humans. Understand that you want to find someone who you click with. Every therapist is not the same, and it can unfortunately be frustrating to find a good match. Don't give up. Success is so worth it. I've always assumed my issues had to be resolved within myself. Ah yes, the bootstrap approach chanted to poor people. You are clearly capable in many things. You are above average in your progress. You don't have to do everything alone. It's okay to get a profi. Shinel to help you with plumbing or electric for your house. It's okay to get a professional for your mind and body as well. That doesn't make you less. It only means you're human. I've always assumed my issues had to be resolved within myself. If you had a broken leg, would you insist on fixing it yourself? Trauma and neurosis are injuries of the brain. You go see a professional to fix injuries. I think you can't afford to not get therapy. I've always assumed my issues had to be resolved within myself. This is true. However, what a therapist can help you with is identifying your disordered thoughts, showing you the tools and how to learn to use them to begin to unpack your trauma/disruptive thoughts, etc. You started off the top stating that you find it difficult to spend on wants and only look to spend on needs. How is something causing enough disordered behavior that it has stressed you to the point that you've come to the RNet to determine what to do, not indication of a need not being met? I agree that the thread is being hand-wavy about cost. We don't know what you have, PPO, HDHP, HMO, etc., so we can't know what it will cost you. When I went 5 years back, I had PPO, and it was charged at the specialist rate on my insurance, $50. Today I have an HDHP, so it would cost whatever it actually costs. In either case, at your income where I was back then, I'd still consider it. There's no valor in suffering through L. IFA because you were unwilling to act. See if your employer has an employee assistance program, EAP. Mine does. The first 6 sessions with a therapist and covered 100%, and the following sessions are treated through insurance. So in my case, just my copay. You have the money. That's what savings are for. Therapy would be a good investment of your money then. It would help you out. Yes, you'll have to pay. It will be a good lesson in spending money can provide value to you and be okay. If you want to keep living in fear, you do you. Deleted. Assume his childhood trauma is that debilitating OP chose the word terrified. That's a very base human emotion that shouldn't come with spending $20 on a night out. The dude is fine the way he is. Did you read the post? Don't try to force someone into therapy because you assume his childhood trauma is that debilitating. The guy said he has no friends because he's scared to spend or put himself into social situations that require it. That alone is debilitating for a healthy life. Things like scarcity of food, shelter, and a stable home will almost certainly present trauma to a child, especially if those things are surrounded by the anxiety and stress of the parents. There's also absolutely no downside to having a session with a therapist to see where it leads, even if you don't end up with a diagnosis. It can be very helpful just to be listened to by someone who does it professionally. The real bum-ass take is the weird aversion to therapy you and other people have. It's not like you're getting committed to a mental ward for 6 months. You're spending a few $100, much cheaper with insurance if they cover it, every week or every other week to work through emotional and mental problems. It's a professional for an hour. If you have decent insurance, it should cover therapy. Find out which clinics/therapists are covered under your insurance. My kid went through therapy for ADHD, and it was 100% covered by insurance. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Some things are worth the money. My parents, children of the Great Depression, were like this, always paying the absolute minimum for anything, which in the long run cost more money because of the cheap workmanship product that often comes with the lowest price. Also, your future isn't guaranteed. While I encourage saving for retirement, don't become so focused on that to the neglect of enjoying life today. Don't take this to mean to not fund your retirement, but you could cut that down to 15 to 20% rather than 30% and still be ahead of the game. Remember that money is a tool. Some money is meant to be spent, other money is meant to be saved, and other is meant to be invested. Therapy is an investment. Cheap, no. Affordable with health insurance, yes. You also make enough and don't spend anything so you can absolutely afford it. The reality is that childhood trauma related to money is a very real thing. It can have major impacts on your adult life if you don't take action to address the trauma and process it in a healthy way. Therapy is your answer. No one on here is going to be able to give you a budget that overrides your trauma response. You need to work with a professional. It will have a massive impact positively on your life. I pay $3,000 out of pocket per year for therapy, and I wouldn't do it if it wasn't worth it. Best $3,000 I spend per year. Start with your job's Employee Assistance Program if they have one, EAP. Many employers will cover 4 to 8 therapy visits before you have to start paying, and they can usually get you in quickly. Before you engage in therapy, I suggest you budget a monthly amount for life improvement, enjoyment, and make sure you spend it. Pursue your interests and begin to spoil yourself. A book, music, movie, candy, a package of cooked frozen shrimp and jar of cocktail sauce. Anything that, in the past, you wanted but decided to forego. You can still be discriminating, but now it's within your budget. Moving from frugality to a reasonable level of spending on yourself is a difficult journey. There will always be a more useful or responsible use of money. You have to learn to give yourself permission to spend money for something just because you want to. I have health insurance through my job, USA, and my copay per therapy session is $10. I agree this is a deep-rooted fear of scarcity. I have it too. Therapy, good luck OP. Trauma is just anything that has caused a neurological shift in your brain that affects the way you view and experience the world. Trauma doesn't have to be an episode of Law & Order SVU. It could be as simple as my mom always took my brother out for McDonald's, but not me. We all have trauma from our childhood, some more severe than others, but it still affected what and how we do things as an adult. Your parents' spending habits and the upbringing in poverty have essentially traumatized you into thinking you'll go bankrupted just as them. But that's not necessarily going to be the case for you. It's okay to go to the movies or go out with friends and splurge on a nice pair of shoes or outfit. You work hard for your money, and life is too short not to enjoy it. And you can without racking up a lot of credit card debt. Financial anxiety is a thing, and you may want to talk to someone that can help you find a balance. You need a therapist. It will change your life. You have suffered severe childhood trauma, and you need to work through that with a therapist. Your comment has been removed because we don't allow political discussions, political baiting, or soapboxing. Rule 6/slat.reddit.com/personalfinance/rules. This includes questions or discussions about proposed legislation or government policy changes. I'm typically against the new norm of calling everything trauma, but if you grew up broke and now it's causing you to have no friends and not be able to spend money comfortably based on your past, that's trauma. Get help. OP, it is trauma. I grew up the same way, and it changes the way your brain works, echoing everyone that you should try some therapy. Additionally, the stress of childhood poverty can have lifetime negative health effects, and you need to get some help working through this so you can minimize those. One thing therapy helped me recognize was that having fun and doing nice things for yourself was a tool for maintaining both physical and mental health. You have worked hard and deserve to be happy, so me times being poor makes you forget the value of happiness over money. Big internet hugs from someone who has been there. I'm incredibly ignorant on therapy. How would my insurance even work? Do I just hand the therapist my insurance card? I think the easiest way is to go to your insurance company website and search for doctors. Usually, you can specify a specialty like behavioral health or mental health. That will show you therapists in your area that accept your insurance. If you are having a hard time, you can also just call your health insurance helpline, usually on a page called Contact Us on their website or your insurance card, and they can send you a list. It can sometimes be a little hard to find someone taking new patients, NTS, so you may need to do a little calling around to see if the practices on your list are taking new folks. As far as using insurance, you usually pay your copay at the time of service, usually between $20 and $50, depending on your plan, and then they bill your insurance company for the rest. It's worth all the hassle. I got real progress with just a few months, and it is just so helpful to get outside perspective on your problems and how to deal with them. Wishing you all the luck, friend. Doesn't matter if it is trauma or whatnot. If you have constant fear and are terrified to do normal things, a therapist can help. This is something Reddit won't be able to help you, except direct you to a therapist. You're scarred by the trauma you experienced and witnessed. It happens. I think in your situation, I'd seek professional help to get over some hurdles. It's okay to splurge on what you work so hard for. Responsibly, a budget gives you power to spend. It's a way of telling yourself you have my permission. I mean, I love my parents. I wouldn't consider my childhood traumatic, but maybe that's me deflecting. Ooh, that's an important distinction to make with your therapist. Living in poverty is traumatic. Full stop. For everyone. No one wants to live that way if given a choice. Once you start really unpacking how your childhood impacted you, it may feel like you need someone or something to blame and that it was your parents' fault. Remember that they experienced trauma from it as well, so be kind to one another during this discovery. It's really frustrating, but a lot of this kind of trauma is imply happenstance of birth or some other completely uncontrollable randomness of the universe. It sucks, but it's true. What an assumption. So most people in developing countries are traumatized because they're poor? Poverty can induce trauma. Can! It's not an assumption, it's been documented and studied. It's also based on the actual definition of poverty, which may not be what we are aligned on yet. Poverty is a state or condition in which a person or community lacks the financial resources and essentials for a minimum standard of living. The abstract, but critical, element you're pointing out is essentially how a minimum standard of living is perceived. If you live amongst millionaires and you make minimum wage, you are in a state of poverty, and having to deal with that experience is traumatic. If everyone around you lives off the land in grass huts, no one has any money, and everyone barters for what they need, then your standard of living may be poor compared to an American city, but it's exactly like everyone's else in your context. No trauma involved there. However, if that same community cannot procure or produce enough food and water to have all of their members survive without pain, that would be poverty. Those without the means to procure or trade for water, food, would be considered in poverty to those who can for sure, but the entire community could view themselves in poverty because they cannot reach that minimum consistently. The stress of not having enough of the minimum basics and unnecessary death is possible would be obviously traumatic. It's the circumstance of other that makes living in poverty even true. But where it is true, it is inherently traumatic. Important note, this whole topic is further harder to measure, as poverty is not uniformly traumatic to all individuals in a linear scale. Also, since some people's particular brain soup is better or worse at dealing with trauma of different kinds, everyone will not always be impacted the same way or amount. Humans want very much to believe we have more control over this than we really do. Maybe you've gone on the other end of the spectrum and have placed your parents on a pedestal that can't be touched, slashed, criticized. At the end of the day, we're all human, and we all make mistakes. You can still love your parents and still think they could have done better to provide for you. You can definitely still love your parents and still think going through a bankruptcy through no one's fault is traumatic to you as a child. Good luck. At the end of the day, are you happy? If you are, don't bother what anyone else thinks, even if their advice would help. But since you're posting this cry for help on Reddit, it looks like you want to change something, and without getting your whole life history, therapy is the simplest, not easiest advice we can give. If growing up in poverty induces trauma, most people would be considered traumatized. You and your parents had it tough, and you learned that you don't want to be in a financial unstable situation. And it seems like you are dealing well with that. Congrats. Now you need to learn that it's also okay to spend money for fun or non-necessities, as long as you enjoy it. A good way is to budget. When doing this, also include a fun account, transferring some percent of your monthly income there. Have fun with it. Tell yourself that the money on this account is to spoil yourself. I grew up in a very basic household and spending money always was an issue for me. Now, with budgeting, it feels so much better as I plan for my monthly expenses and invest, so I don't have the fear. Plus, I have this spending account where I don't feel bad when using it. Good luck, you're doing great. If growing up in poverty induces trauma, most people would be considered traumatized. Correct. Most people should be considered traumatized. The word trauma has a lot of negative connotations, and for good reasons. But basically, everyone has some level of trauma in their life. A family member dying unexpectedly is trauma. Your parents stressing over money can be traumatic, and plenty of other things. Trauma is not just someone doing something terrible to you specifically. It's an effect of negative events in your life that shape your worldview and change how you think about yourself and your family. Obviously, there are different levels of trauma, and some are much harder to deal with. But everyone has trauma on some level. Yeah, I would absolutely consider most people walking around in the world traumatized to a certain extent. Just because it isn't severe doesn't mean it isn't there. Think of it this way. Spending money on experiences is also investing in your future the same way saving or retirement would be. Having friends, hobbies, vacations, etc. add a lot of value to your life as far as mental health and long-term physical health. Pick up tennis, get drinks with your friends to build emotional connections, travel, and get new perspectives. Obviously, there's a scale of where you are all the way to extravagant. Have a long-term retirement/savings goal. Build a budget, to then allocate some money to fun. So you're in a comfort zone of financial security while building in fun. Life is short, and a lot of these expenses you are avoiding are most definitely investments too. That's a good way to think about it. I never considered fun to be an investment. If I invest in fun, the return would be improved mental health, which beats. Something that makes me feel a little better when I feel like I'm behind is to look up stats on average savings and retirement accounts. This sub can make you feel like you're very behind because you're surrounded by people who are very concerned and on top of their finance goals, when in reality, nearly half of Americans have nothing in retirement. According to usafacts.org's data project/retirement savings, only 34% of people in your age bracket, 25 to 29 years old, have at least 10K SAV in retirement accounts. You have a good 30 years to keep saving, and you already have a decent chunk invested. You will be fine and in a better position than most. While you're right about doing better than most people, The reality is the bar is pretty darn low to do better than most Americans. But at the same time, I feel like most of us on Reddit already feel we're smarter and more capable and more intelligent individuals. After all, most of America thinks the other half of the country is beyond dumb. So at a minimum, we all think we're better than the bottom 50%. For being better financially prepared here, I don't think simply comparing with the median MA makes any sense. I've always been told growing up to look at people doing well or better than you, not to get jealous or envious, but to learn about how you can do better yourself. It's maybe what my parents said a lot, and at a young age I felt very annoyed by that. Why do I always have to look at really successful people? They'd tell me how smart I was or how capable I was, but looking back, they're totally right. I do think I'm intelligent. I have no doubt I can do better than not only 50%, but maybe 90% of people, and yeah, there's no way I think I can only make median income or even upper 75%. I went to one of the top engineering schools, and I've worked at multiple companies where I've been promoted multiple times too. So yeah, no, I absolutely shouldn't have just felt complacent doing a little better than the average American. I think it's that drive that keeps you going to push further. I don't see it just as a driver for wealth, but for everything. If I have a hobby in photography, I think it's always good to continue to see how I can improve, learn from others, etc. Yeah, my photos are better than most people's, and photos from my phone already often get compliments, but why stop there? Someone famously in debt once said, "He who dies with the most debt wins. Live a little." I'm terrified to spend money. How do I find a way to experience life for once? Money is simply coupons that expire to you in 80 years. What is the point of leaving a theme park with coupons you didn't use? Did you either get a much better job or dramatically change your saving habits quite recently? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to have only $38 saved on a $75 salary if you're that frugal. Reddit is always quick to shout therapy, and that's not necessarily a bad idea, but it sounds like you've experienced some more mundane life changes pretty recently given the above. Maybe think through them for a while before doing anything too dramatic. I was an idiot with money until 25. That's when I went into hardcore mode. Not sure what triggered it, but I paid off about $40K in debt in 2 years and then was building from zero. Nothing too crazy in terms of salary jumps. Went from $56K from 24-26 and then got to $75K at 27. Nothing too crazy in terms of salary jumps. Went from $56K from 24-26 and then got to $75K at 27. That is a significant bump in salary. Put it in terms of percentages, if that makes it more clear. That's a 33% salary increase. Anything over 10% is meaningful, and anything over 20% is a really big deal. A 33% increase is going to be literally life-changing. It sounds like you're looking at your past self without remembering your past circumstance. Your ability to save now is directly tied to the fact that you're making substantially more money. You weren't an idiot 3 years ago, you just had less money. I'm sure this is only part of the picture, but your current frugalness might be related to this self-defamatory attitude you have about your past self. You might be trying to correct for your past mistakes. If your only mistake was having a lower salary, you might be applying that effort in ways that aren't actually sensible. Came here looking for this answer. Congratulations on turning things around, paying off that much debt and now saving. I agree with others that have said therapy. You have to take care of yourself. It may help with problems you don't even realize you have. If I was in your situation, I would lower my contributions to retirement to 20% with yearly increases of 1 to 2%. Put the other 10% in a high-yield savings account. And when you want to enjoy yourself, you know that money is set aside for that. If you don't spend it all you every month are saving/growing it. Could be a nice vacation/trip or anything you might want. Be well. I had this same mentality for a very long while, terrified of spending. And while you have this extra psych component of not wanting to backslide to your previous habits, here's what fixed it for me. After I found myself on track, meaning my saving habits had paid off, and I actually did end up with a fairly large, for my age, savings, my brain eventually leveled out a bit and wasn't in such a pack rat mode, although it's still there to a degree. Perhaps this will happen to you. After T happened, what I settled on was creating a savings budget, kind of the opposite of a regular budget. Basically, you need to find out the amount of dollars you want to end up with and do the math to see how much you need to save to hit it. So for me, I basically max out my 401k, mine and my wife's Roth IRAs, and then the rest is there to spend without worry, because I know that saving the other amounts is good enough. Your brain finally finished developing is what was likely. Most people are basically still forming until mid-20s. The brain finishes developing and maturing in the mid to late 20s. The part of the brain behind the forehead called the prefrontal cortex is one of the last parts to mature. This area is responsible for skills like planning, prioritizing, and making good decisions. narhash.nimh.gov, publications, the teen brain, 7 things to know. Text, although the brain sent stow, PS sent you growing, the last sent parts to mature. You could die tomorrow in a car crash. You can't take your money with you. Live a little. I understand how you feel. Honestly, what helped me has been budgeting. I use YNAB. Some people hear budgeting and think it's to cut back on spending. The way I look at budgeting is to give myself permission to spend on things, experiences that bring me joy, since I know I've covered the necessities. You have to find a healthy balance between saving and enjoying life. I would agree that YNAB would be helpful. It is good to know all of the necessities are fully funded. You can clearly see where all of your money will be going and can spend what you decide to ahead of time. I would advise you to keep taking 30% out, but send 10% of that money to a vacation fund, with understanding that vacations are so you can remain on the top of your game at 28, 38, 48, etc. I hate to imply bad stuff, but you might need that 30% one day if you don't relax and take some time to recharge. Do you have a budget that is written down or online? I was in a similar situation, but didn't have nearly as much in retirement, and I was slightly older. A budget set me free from that worry and anxiety. I had a goal that I wanted to reach for retirement and an amount that I would need to save in that at an assumed market rate. I also created a budget item for fun money and deposited a decent amount in there. My internal rule was that I could spend that money without guilt on anything I want. Because that is what it was for, and it had to directly affect my happiness, so not used for car repairs or bills, etc. Those were budgeted separately. Think about your money as that elixir or mana potion in a video game. You keep saving them just in case, and before you know it, you've beaten the game and have 1,000 potions that would have made it way easier and more enjoyable. OP, you sound a lot like me. I just turned 29, and I can't tell how tough it was to tell myself to live and enjoy. Something I learned to help me is that you are not your parents and have learned from their mistakes. It's a lesson. Learn and grow from that. Another quote I read online was, "Discipline is the currency of success." We are penny pinchers. We feel like every moment needs to be weighed or needs an opportunity cost explanation. You are on pace and doing phenomenal. What's a skill you have? Be that others don't. Financial discipline. You're doing fine. Allow yourself to accept that and enjoy a little more of life. Yes, OP sounds like someone who has financial discipline in terms of heavy saver. Assume they covers their expenses to survive and is asking what they can do to enjoy more. Sounds like they could and need to hear someone tell them to. And that they should have confidence in their skill to get disciplined again after small splurges here and there. This sub might not be good for your mental health. This community is borderline out of touch, with a handful of people saying you're behind, even though nearly half of Americans don't have $1,000 in emergency savings. You're statistically significantly above the median for a late 20s individual. I don't believe 50% of Americans don't have $1,000 in case of an emergency. They may choose not to have liquid $1,000, but if they needed to scrap it, they would find it. I wonder how exactly the question is constructed that they got 50%. Nearly half of Americans don't have $1,000 in emergency savings. What's the source on this? Is it that, or nearly half feel they can't afford a $1,000 emergency? It's a feeling-based survey. Tons of people automate their investments and feel they're paycheck to paycheck, but if they need $1,000, they'll get it. There's never a convenient time to have a surprise $1,000 bill. Not to take anything away from those who are actually paycheck to paycheck, but it's not nearly as high a percentage as the clickbait articles will have you believe. The number of people out there who max out retirement accounts and save 40 to 50K a year and then say, oh, I can't afford $1,000. Something else to think about. Everyone says therapist. Think about your physical health. That kind of stress ruins your gut health, which will make you sick in other ways. Invest in yourself. I do body weight workouts at home and with dumbbells, but that's about it. Haven't got a gym membership yet. I never developed a need for material things. That actually puts you ahead of a lot of people. You have specific goals like home ownership, so it's not like you're just hoarding. But if you can't spend anything on experiences, unwilling to pay the limited amounts of money that go into developing personal relationships, that could be destructive. Others have suggested you see a professional. That might help, but just realize that financially you're actually doing a lot of things right.